And sign-ins through the sign-in sheet, wherever it's at. Has everybody signed in?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Public comment. Now it's time for anyone in the public that wishes to make a comment on an issue that is not on the agenda to do so. Do we have anybody from the public who would like to comment on an item?
So I would like to introduce myself. My name is Natalia Molina, and I was here at one of the prior meetings. I was looking at the agenda, and I also compared it to the prior agenda when I last attended. And in addition to being of service to the Board of Supervisors, I just wanted to make sure that there was an education component to HAC, and I just wanted to recommend for the next meeting
Why
that
would we do an education component?
just for our own, for the members' enrichment, I wanted to know more about Lead Me Home, and I was hoping maybe at the next meeting, when I am on the commission, when I am on HAC, that we could have a speaker come and talk to us about Lead Me Home. I thought that might be interesting.
I don't know anything about Lead Me Home.
Anyone
Yeah,
else?
we could,
So if I'm understanding this correct, if I'm understanding this correctly, you'd like to see that we add an item here where we do like a, kind of like an enrichment session where you guys bring in a speaker here and there?
Yes.
we can do anything. I mean, it's just an advisory committee. It's just what the committee members want to spend their time on. So I think what we want to do is talk to Moog as the chair and say, can we add this to the agenda? And then he just says yes or no.
I
Is
think
that
it would
easy?
depend on how many items we have on the agenda.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I live way over there, it's a long time home.
So since this is public comment, can we receive
Right.
that and
Here, go to
then
the
talk
next.
about that notion with what we might do in the future rather than having a discussion about whether we should have the discussion?
You can do that, but in the future, we're going to be talking about homeless shelter, Lead Me Home,
Great.
and all the programs. So right now, what's happening is the Office of Employment and Training is transferring out of my department and moving back to the Department of Social Services. When that happens, I'll have more time for housing and economic development, which is what they hired me for. So I'm getting more involved into the social services of housing and working on the pipeline and some of the other things that we would like to report on and include. But those items I need to work out with the chair and timing and the interest of the committee members. But as an advisory committee, you can discuss anything you want to discuss.
So we'll take the comment and we'll act on it accordingly.
Act on the
later.
committee today? Isn't this your first meeting?
I'm s-
I'm a member of the public right now.
Oh,
So this is just for the next meeting that I will be.
Okay.
the board hasn't appointed you yet? Board of Supervisors?
She was appointed, but she just completed her ethics course online and she filed her oath of office this week.
You're not legal.
So, yeah. So totally-
I'm a legal member of the public,
That's right.
and so I attended the last meeting as a member of the public, and I noticed that the agenda was a little lean then, and I'm like, you know, what, we can add
We
an
like it
education.
that way.
Yeah, no, it depends on the time.
Yeah.
We have 2 hours is enough for a meeting.
The last meeting that I attended was very, very brief. I think it was maybe 30 minutes. So
Okay,
that's just it.
depends.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Well, you could go back and do roll call so that Anita can have in record who was present and who was not.
Where's your,
Well, I thought that was what sign sheet was all about. So we're using the
You're
best.
going to introduce the
Okay.
Well, okay, well, that
So
was
where would
further
you
down
like
on
to
the
sit?
agenda.
next to Margaret?
I'm just going by the agenda.
Okay.
Okay? So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for March 8th. Somebody want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I move that the minutes be approved as presented.
Need a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Nothing listed here for old business, new business, there we go. Receive introduction of the two committee members, Rosie Gonzalez and Wes White.
So we're gonna have each one of them give us a little bio about themselves, briefly tell us, you know, what you do and why you decided to join the committee, and how you wish to make an impact by doing.
Hi everybody, my name is Rosie Gonzalez. I live in Soledad. I work at Central Coast Center for Independent Living, which is an advocacy group for people with disabilities. I decided that I wanted to do this because I have been asked a couple of times over the years during SCORE meetings. I'm the assistant whatever to whoever down there. And I finally decided, okay, I don't have kids at home. My baby is 25 and my grandkids have parents, so I don't have to do them either. So I wanted to return something to our communities. And that's basically why I'm here.
Wes?
My name's Wes White. I am a community enthusiast at large. I'm also a president of Salinas Homeless Room, and we've been active the last couple of years trying to help with basic human rights like shelter. And so the warming shelter is a big deal. The leaving home plan is a big deal. So these kind of topics, I'm glad and encouraged to see that they'll be rolling on.
Where do you live?
In Salinas.
So yes, welcome both of you to the committee. Mark, you don't have your doohickey, what's up?
I don't know, I didn't know we were having a meeting here either, actually.
Oh, shit.
I got
Can't help
an
you
email
there.
that said you weren't gonna be here.
What's that?
I thought I got an email that you didn't accept.
Really?
10.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, technology, oh,
Right.
those email invitations.
Well, anyway, you're
Lost in
here.
the shuffle.
Sorry, I don't have your name tag.
Oh, no problem.
All right, so moving on. Now we're receiving a report from the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance update.
So, back in March, we reported that we were looking at updating the ordinance. Back in 2010, the Board of Supervisors adopted a new general plan. It made some changes that need to be reflected in the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance. The biggest one is increasing the amount of affordable housing from 20 to 25%. And adding two new income categories, Workforce 1 and Workforce 2. And then changing the term of affordability for units. Over the years, we have gone from 30 years to perpetuity. Now the direction is back to 30 years for owner-occupied. The board has, in some cases, dropped the term of affordability down to 15 years for a specific subdivision. We need to catch all this stuff up. We also need a firm legal basis for having the ordinance. All the information that we rely on for the findings is very dated. So we need to go out and re-quantify the need for the program, hopefully figure out where the most demand is, and then come up with an ordinance that balances and harmonizes with the general plan requirements versus where demand is, and come up with a way to balance the creation of on-site units versus the payment of in lieu fees. Over the years, the county has gone back and forth on in lieu fees versus on-site, and even the appropriate locations for these. Right now, the preference is to provide on-site units, and the calculation is such that if there is a fractional unit, the developer is given the choice of paying an in lieu fee or providing an extra partial unit. So if you have to provide 7.5, you can either pay 0.5 or provide 8 units. we need to come up with a way to, a new way to figure out what the fee should be. It hasn't been updated since 2011, and it's a very convoluted formula that looks at sub-county regions, and it's very hard to get the base information on what the development costs are. The location for affordable housing, right now, the general plan, it has kind of a sledgehammer approach. If you're not in a community area or a rural center, so think Castroville or Bradley, being a community center and a rural center, the sledgehammer is 100% of the project has to be affordable. That, we may not have that kind of demand if you're in Bradley. You know, just making numbers up, if you have a 100-unit subdivision and you have a 35 or a 40 or 100% affordability requirement, you probably are going to have a hard time selling those units in Bradley. Whereas there's probably much greater demand for the same number of affordable units in Carmel Valley. And so we need to come up with a way to balance these things out.
Wait a minute, Tom.
Yeah.
So you're saying that in the new general plan, everything's supposed to be 100% affordable in those units?
So-
In those areas?
So the way that the general plan is written is if you are not in a community center like Castroville, or you are not in a rural center that has an infrastructure financing plan adopted. Okay, so this means that, you know, Bradley or San Lucas or some of these communities would have an infrastructure plan that is going to address San Lucas's nitrate problem in the water and the extra sewage treatment for it. Until those plans are in place and they know how you're going to pay, those things are going to be paid for, you're going to be 100% affordable. The intent is really to push development into areas where there is already development. Okay. There are, you know, once San Lucas or Bradley or one of these places gets an infrastructure financing plan, the requirements go down. You're then at the 25% requirement. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we need to become consistent or more consistent with the 2010 adopted general plan. When we review the inclusionary ordinance, we find a lot of areas need to be updated.
And we've encountered some challenges over the last 18 months or 2 years with, you know, the ordinance says a minimum of 20% inclusionary. Well, does that mean that we have always interpreted fractional units, or is that not providing the 20% when you're at 7.5 and you're not providing 8 units? So we need some clarity on that. The ordinance and the general plan both say, you know, we want the inclusionary units dispersed throughout the property, throughout the project, but we'll allow clustering for economies of scale, and they're kind of mutually exclusive. You can't do one or the other. There's too much interpretive space. The current ordinance and the general plan say that you're supposed to have like units, so they have to appear similar to everything else in the subdivision. They have to be representative of the units in the subdivision in terms of bedroom count. But does that mean you cannot produce rental units in an otherwise for sale subdivision? This came up with the project in Carmel Valley. You know, so we're looking for clarity on some of those things. That'll be part of the rewrite. And then the last thing is the affordable housing landscape has changed. As of today, financing has dried up. We don't have the redevelopment tax increment money. They used to, 20% of all redevelopment tax increment used to go to affordable housing. That went away in 2012. A lot of the programs that we rely on for secondary and third and subsidiary levels of financing, like the home program, don't have a lot of money. You know, the state is looking at maybe funding 2 or 3 projects a year through home. So we also need to develop some kind of a local financing mechanism for affordable housing. The last big change was the Palmer decision, which we covered in March, which basically said that if an inclusionary ordinance, it cannot set maximum rent limits because it runs afoul of the state's rent limit laws. Okay, so now we can't even use, without the county giving up some kind of a financial concession. So we, in terms of giving up fees or paying a subsidy or something, it now means that we can only accept, in practical terms, for sale units. That's what the law did, or that's what the court said. So we need to figure out and work with the board and the Housing Advisory Committee and the Planning Commission to reconcile all of these different issues and come up with an ordinance that's going to work for the community and to deliver affordable housing.
So in other words, they don't want affordable housing anytime soon.
So our original thought was to divide up the ordinance into chunks and bring it back to you in chunks and update it. And we're finding that that task is taking too long. So what we'd like to do is hire a consultant, have the consultant update it and make it as modern as possible and as consistent to the general plan as possible. I think the balance of it would be working out policies, and that's where we might develop a policy as the Housing Advisory Committee, send it to the Planning Commission, see if they agree or disagree, and rework it before we have a final recommendation to the Board of Supervisors.
And give a lot of support on that, so it perhaps would have some weightiness before it made it there.
I think a new inclusionary ordinance would have a lot of support because the existing one is so far out of date. The issue I have with it is how we calculate and the amount that we come up with for an in lieu fee. It is just too low. Part of that is building costs have skyrocketed. We'll see if they come
I
down
don't know
over
if it's
the next
skyrocketed
couple
or
of
if the
years.
original goofy was never realistic.
I don't think the fee was realistic. Anyway, we need to recalibrate it. So it is out of date and we want to be consistent. And we want to put together a list of consultants. If you want to be part of that selection process, we'll come up with a criteria and you can help us select a consultant or we can just do it for you.
Are you gonna try and roll the F2A or farm
Farm worker housing, H2A.
H2A into that?
That's
I know it's a
That's separate
different
from
fish,
inclusionary
but
housing.
it's still trying to get affordable housing.
But it
For the farm
supersedes and exceeds the needs of an inclusionary ordinance. So you don't need the inclusionary ordinance if you have the farm worker housing. So why add something to it or put a ball and chain on it when it's not needed? So no, we don't want to,
I think I told you,
Tie
we
the
were trying
two
to build
together.
farm worker housing in Castroville. And because of the fees that they were trying to charge in Castroville, it's not affordable. You can't get anybody to talk to us about the fee structures and getting it modified for private developers.
right, and I don't deal with fees.
Again, it's that affordable housing realm, right?
So,
That's not, again, the inclusionary ordinance.
Right, so-
The fees would be separate agency. So what we want to do is narrow the focus, update it, make it modern, and get it adopted by the Board of Supervisors so we can have new fees that reflect the current market.
and that would not be charged to a farm worker housing project.
All right,
The farm worker housing is explicitly exempted from the inclusionary ordinance. So if you come in with a farm worker housing project, I don't even look at it.
you exceed all expectations.
Right. But addressing the fees, I guess we'd have to take that up to Supervisor Phillips so that, because I don't know whose fees they are. You know, there's a whole host between the county, the fire district, the school district,
For
the
for lots of people.
TMC,
TMC.
industrial redevelopment,
Customer redevelopment doesn't have fees anymore.
We're done.
It's gone.
100%.
Yeah.
We have not collected tax increments since 2012.
So somebody might want to talk to Ford, because he's trying to tell us that they're $4,000 or $5,000 a unit.
Really?
Yeah.
If you have a fee sheet that they've given you, that would be helpful.
I'd like to see that, because I'll join your fight on that one.
Yeah.
Remember I was trying to set up that meeting that you were asking for?
Yeah,
Yeah. You never showed up.
let's make it happen.
Let's make it happen.
I think handing this over to a consultant's a great idea. Are there some that specialize in inclusionary here in California?
Yeah, several. Yeah.
And the city of Salinas just went through the process. They suggested we not use their consultant, but they've been very useful in identifying other consultants. And then where we would like the hack to come back in is getting to your point about getting community buy-in. We would like to take this to have at least 8 community meetings, plus 2 hack meetings. And these meetings would be before the land use advisory committees for most of the planning areas. Some of them will be consolidated just because there's too many. There's like 13 land use advisory groups in the county.
Yeah.
And some of them are close, Toro, Spreckles, for example. But we would like each hack member to pick one of those meetings once they're established and attend.
And attend more if they like.
And more if they like.
Attend as many as you would
Ah.
like,
But we
would
want a
like
minimum
to
of one
attend.
out of you.
Yeah.
Okay. And we expect this process is probably going to take 12 to 15 months, maybe a little longer, because it will require sequel review as an ordinance. So, but we're getting the ball rolling and started. And you all have a copy of the draft RFP, so if you have comments on it, feel free to email them in. I do need to get them in the next week or so that I can get moving.
Are we gonna tackle this, asking questions about this?
That was just it. What else we got?
I have more, but I
Okay.
think.
My only comment is, having been part of the piecemeal part and not feeling very successful at it, that I'm encouraged you found the funding to even propose this. That's good. Because that was never discussed in the past, and we would only take
Yeah.
a section of it and do the best we could with that section. And even in that section that we took, either in lieu fees, we would still look at the sub-geographical area on that too, and it just doesn't solve the problem. So I would, I'm glad.
Well, as I recall, you didn't get any support either when
No.
you proposed the fees to the
And then we
supervisor,
presented
and
the
it got
board.
shut down.
Supervisors got shot down, so.
So I have questions. This is great to hear. So one of the things I did in my naivety when I first got on this was say, but that calculates to this much. How can you build a house for that little money? And just questioning, not understanding the whole concept of in lieu of fees, and in my naivety, thinking that the houses were actually getting built and being paid for 100% with this money, and finding out that that wasn't the case. That's not the way things work to get funding and the opportunities. So I'm really happy to see this happen, because another thing that was of concern was looking back at what was in place. There was a process in place that says every year these fees are supposed to go before the Board of Supervisors, and that wasn't happening. And when the question was, why isn't it happening? It was kind of, well, because we don't have the money to do anything about, to present any new information, because it's going to cost a lot of money and take a lot of time to calculate those fees. So I thought that there was merit in simply going before the Board of Supervisors and saying that. I think that could have shifted some money and shifted some energy. So I don't know what happened to create this opportunity and this money, but I'm really grateful that it's happening.
We lost an employee instead of replacing the employee. We used the funds to do the study
So you guys are doing more work.
with less staff.
Thank you for doing more work with less staff and freeing up that money. A suggestion I will express again, which I had said in that subcommittee, I forget who that was, Dave, you, me, and 2 other people. Who else was there?
That's about right.
I don't know.
Maybe more.
I don't know.
Where 2 people meet?
No, there were 3, I can't remember, but anyway, so I didn't see it, but again, I just looked over this quickly, I didn't think I was gonna be able to make the meeting today. I didn't see in the RFP as part of the deliverables, a process for updating. Now, that could be pie in the sky again, but just some process. It's not a process for determining a number, just a commitment to,
So Karen, if we put that into the RFP process, the consultant would write that in saying, you need to hire us every year and
Right.
update this.
okay, so we're not gonna do that.
Blow up the cost and the expense. We will do that,
So you will do that.
but we don't put that in the RFP
Okay.
process.
So then at this stage, I'll continue to say, so at this stage, what I'll say is, just for the record, since that was subcommittee meeting and not being, not a public meeting, or I guess public, but we were the only ones there, is that I would like to see that that does happen every year, that charge, that every year you go before the Board of Supervisors, even if the answer is, we don't have any money, we can't recalculate that, this is an old number. I would love that public statement to be made and to support staff in doing that, because I think that would help the board in its budgeting and where its priorities are for the long-term wellness of the county.
I think it would be great to go before the board and give that information. You won't have any impact on the budget.
Right, but never, let me see, just shining a spotlight on some things. Don't underestimate what can happen, because there are people out there like me that were unaware of that. You're not alone. You're not alone. And there are people advocating for other departments and what their needs are. And there are people out there who don't know, you need this help, or we need this help. And that's why we have public discourse. So I just would like to encourage that.
So when we talk about more money on housing and exaction fees, that's a discussion we should have at this level before we run to the Board of Supervisors, because what we would in fact do is add a fee that increases the cost of housing everywhere else to try and subsidize and fund affordable housing. We want to try and look at both and see if there really is a nexus there that can hold up to law to say, is this justified?
It really seems like your hands are, you're charged with this
True.
really lofty goal, and then your hands are tied at every turn. And it
Those are
seems,
the facts that we want to bring.
it seems like an
before the
impossible
Board of
task.
Supervisors.
And meanwhile, the county or the people, members of the community are told, oh, we've got this plan, and this is the way it is. So people think it's happening, and they're confused as to what's going on because they think all this stuff is actually happening, and it's not. Not because of your fault, because of all this contrary legal aspects, these contrary legal aspects.
Okay.
In regards to the financing available, have you been following the raft of bills that are on the governor's desk? And do you have much faith that there's going to be much coming up here, like the bond financing? Or?
We think the $75 fee will finally make it through, the transaction fee, and we also think that the bond will make it through, so we will see some funding. Who will get the funding? LA and Bay Area, or will we get the funding? They may divide it, urban and rural. It's great legislation. When they write the regulations of how to spend the money, that's when we want to give input and see if we're part of the process.
Another question I have is, can you repeat again about the rentals? What you said, I mean, it
About
was
setting the
it was
rent?
No.
painful to hear,
Okay, so
but I just want to make sure I understood it.
All right, so let me go back here. So Palmer 6th Street, Second Court of Appeals, District Court of Appeals found that inclusionary housing programs that imposed rent limits on new units violated the Costa-Hawkins Act, which prohibits rent control in new buildings.
So if affordable rents are what are needed, not affordable purchases of
So-
homes, how are we supposed to
So,
improve that stock.
By law, you can't set those rents anymore.
So, well, we do have an option. There is a way, if we make an investment in the project, whether it is giving up a density bonus or using some of our in lieu fees to subsidize the units, we can buy rent limits. But we have to essentially
We
buy
can't
them.
require it of private developers, but we can,
The developer has to come to us and say, we are willing to.
we have to incentivize that.
Yes, so.
Oh, okay, so there's
So,
hope.
the other thing,
No
you know,
developer in their right mind's gonna wanna do that.
Yes, a developer in their right mind and heart would want to do that, not one
you know,
without their
so
right mind would want.
going way back to the 80s when the inclusionary housing program first began in this county, the housing authority collected all the fees. And so there are a number of developments throughout the county, but concentrated here in Salinas, their housing authority or their development arm owned and operated that were heavily subsidized with the inclusionary fees that were collected at the time. And that's how you can get the affordable rents, is you have an affordable housing developer usually as the best way to come in, because they can leverage other financing sources to bring the cost of development down and not have to spread it across their market rate units.
That'll definitely be a policy you guys are gonna wanna discuss. Because I'm gonna bring back land use scenarios for you and say, here's what I think we ought to do on higher density and mixed use as an incentive to yield more units. You may agree, you may disagree. When we get to the planning commission, at that point, it'll probably be your agreement, and they may disagree with you or agree with you. And we'll have to work something out, and it might require some compromise, but we will definitely have to work through that. Knowing this committee, I have an idea that I'm probably in line with you and be headed in your direction, and planning commission may be a little bit more restrictive.
Okay, you done with that? You done with your questions? Anybody else have questions?
On that one.
Okay, let's move on. So the next item is consider a request from the owners of the Pasadena Inclusionary Housing Rental Units to convert units, yada, yada, yada.
Okay, so that's me again. And they have asked for a continuance of this item to November 8th. They're trying to gather additional information to present to the committee.
Okay.
So,
Is it inappropriate to suggest what type of additional information might be helpful?
that would be, I'm sure they would welcome that feedback, yes.
So we can discuss it, we can't take action on the
Right.
item. Because
Well-
the applicant's not here to present it, but, you know, staff has a recommendation, and I think you have the recommendation in your packet.
Right.
And if you have specific information that you would like to see them present that may bolster their case one way or the other, I'm sure they would appreciate that.
Well, I believe people unless I have a reason to not believe them. And it did strike me as curious, actually what's in here in the staff report, that anything that bolsters the facts that they've stated here, that people don't want these because they're too far from jobs and schools and things like that, I'd be very interested in that, because I've been, part of the community for 30 years. It's always looking for an affordable place to stay. And there are a lot of people that being next to schools, that's not important. Most people, they're single households with no kids out there looking for affordable places, a lot of them. So I'm wondering how this is happening, that nobody wants to rent these places and for those reasons.
Well, I'd be curious, how many of the units are actually vacant? I mean, it talks about one unit
So-
taking 5 months.
We have we are aware of one unit that's about to be vacated.
I think the issue
12
isn't
units.
that the unit is vacant or they have 1 or 2 units vacant. I think the issue that we've run in with this particular landlord is for them to qualify and then for us to qualify and approve who they've selected can take 3 months or can take 5 months or 6 months. So they've complained, you know, our staff isn't doing their job and all of that. So I went back, interviewed staff, reviewed the applications, the process. It's not our staff, it's the applicant. And the applicant isn't doing the asset analysis correctly or not doing it at all. By the time they get through with their paperwork and they send it to us, if it's not complete, we send it back and we ask for this information. So if it took them 3 months to get that, then it would come to us and we turn it around in 2 weeks. And now they've got to spend another month collecting it. They have a 5-month vacancy, they have a 6-month vacancy. They've lost revenue in that unit.
So if a person gets approved, you know, from what I understand, the term is an old term, but it's the term I know, Section 8 housing. If they've qualified through whoever administers the Section 8 housing program, do they automatically meet your requirements? For the income and all that?
They have a voucher?
If they have a voucher,
No, that's
Not
an
really.
analysis,
I do-
but this
yeah.
is different. This is an income qualification like a Section 8, but it's a little higher amount. If they, what we provide and what we
Your
require,
amount's higher or the Section 8 amount's higher?
ours is.
this is not Section 8.
Well, I know it's not.
Can't
That's
compare.
not what I asked.
But if,
But if it's in the box, yeah, they meet it, yeah. They fail to include and add the assets of the applicant. They have other properties, they have other incomes. They leave that out. And they say this person's qualified based on their salary. They submit it to us. We call them, we ask questions, we find out
And so you're saying Section
they
8,
own a
when you go
restaurant
through the
somewhere
Section
with
8,
other
they
income
don't
and
look
they're
at that.
hiding it.
Our inclusionary housing program looks at both income and assets.
Right.
And whereas the Section 8 doesn't really necessarily look at assets, they just look at the income produced by those assets.
Well, this particular owner from the offset has never looked at assets. I mean, that's how people
Correct.
got it in the
Yeah.
first place. So this particular owner who now is responsible to fill these units would not necessarily want to look at assets. And so if anything slows the process down, would be more, as one would suggest, is that they are not inclined to want to do that because they can't make their selection. They have a particular selection process. So the only thing I'd ask is what their process is, break it down like you just said. What's their process? Why is it taking so long? But if you can turn something on September 7th and get it turned around by the 11th, this is not the problem. The problem lies upstream, not downstream. So anything you can tell them is be as specific as you possibly can in terms of how you collect the names of people you want to go in there, how you advertise it, how you market it, whatever terminology you want to use, because I don't think people know about it, to your point. Because if they know about it, with all those cars driving by Pasadena on the way to Monterey, or all the cars driving from Monterey over to Salinas,
Yes.
there's some people that want to live there, and having been part of that school district, they want to live there. So there's lots of reasons to want to be there. So I had a hard time when I went through this, when I saw you couldn't verify
Yeah.
the very things you talked about. It seemed a little silly.
So if this is the case, of this person, of course it deserves consideration one way or the other, but if this is the case and there's really is a problem, it's a big deal and it requires lots of evidence, lots of verification of this. And then we should seriously consider it and decide, but it needs a lot. It's a big claim.
Well, the other thing is if I'm understanding staff's recommendation, they're saying, okay, let's go ahead and now consider them moderate and let them sell them off. You realize you just gave them $150,000 extra?
this is one of those rock and a hard places. If the developer came in and waived Palmer at us, we lose the units anyway. So this is kind of a middle ground where at least we can keep them as affordable units.
What if we wanted to challenge that ruling?
I don't,
Which ruling?
the Palmer, I don't think we would
You
have
didn't-
standing.
you can't
Well,
challenge
is that
the
retroactive?
law, that's Supreme Court, so.
Oh, I thought that was.
Is that law retroactive?
LA.
Oh.
Supreme Court,
It
so-
just
Oh,
said
LA,
that
when you
anything
said
that's been
LA, I
done
thought it was just like a local.
violates
No,
the
no,
Constitution.
law says it's against Supreme Court, yeah.
Okay, but at this point, they're not new.
Well, you're talking workforce or moderate?
No, the rental unit, the fact that they're rental.
Yeah, but they're not.
So we should not have had that ability back in 1995, or 2005.
The theory that wasn't the law in 2000.
Costa Hawkins was the law.
Oh, so somehow we got around it then?
Nobody had
Somebody
challenged, no developer had challenged it yet. A developer challenged it, and that's where we ended up.
But why wouldn't you, why could, since they were originally category was low income, why could you not insist that they sell it as they did at the time they built them, as low income? Not as moderate, not as workforce 1 or 2, but hey, okay, fine, we can't force the rental, but you were required to provide X number of low income housing, and here you are, that's what you sell it for.
Yeah.
So we have the Circle de Cielo housing, and that's the market rate stuff that we manage. This is the rental product.
I understand,
Yeah,
they're wanting
I-
to sell it, though, as if it were.
We don't want them to sell it, we want them to keep it.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, but that's what the recommendation says.
I would
Correct. We are
To
not
change it to
recommending.
moderate and allow
We
them
don't
to
like that
sell.
recommendation.
change it to sell at moderate levels.
Yeah, that was the recommendation.
Yeah, we don't
I
like that.
thought workforce would be allow sale, moderate would
We
prevent
can-
it from selling and it would stay rental.
No. They need, their proposal is to raise the affordability level to workforce 2 and
I know theirs.
come in and turn them into condominiums. The recommendation is to allow the conversion at moderate rate income.
And they would still have to abide by the
So the-
ownership length as far as low
Yes,
inclusionary housing.
right, so that would trigger.
Starting with 0 date.
Yeah, that would
Okay.
trigger the 30 years, and every time it turns over before that 30 years, the new 30-year clock would
Right.
start, so,
So at least you don't lose the
right.
housing stock, you just are
Right.
moving
And-
from rentals that really are affordable
And
versus.
as to your question about low income, at the time, the ordinance didn't require a percent of the units to be low income,
Okay.
so it was,
Sounds like a lot of attorneys will be on this one then.
yeah, so I was trying to come up with something that was consistent with the original intent, and kept the units affordable.
And keep them in the housing stock for
Right.
as long as we possibly can. And
Correct.
Okay.
So it was a challenging situation.
But they weren't interested in it, they want to go all the way to
I
workforce
think-
2.
Yes, I think that's what they want.
Which is 150 to
To
180%.
Yes.
Now, according to what you wrote here, it said they want, they're supposed to be or, affordable to low or moderate.
But the ordinance did not require that percentage the way that the new ordinance does. So that was in our
Who
agreement.
chose to make them?
That was
The way they did.
that was the developer housing agreement that was reached. It was not done by the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, they signed an agreement, so,
They did,
to build them this way.
yes. But the underlying rules of the game changed with rentals.
So we're letting them take them out of rentals. Why does that change
It,
the agreement?
that's a very good question. I do not have to answer for that.
Obviously, we're trying to fight, I'm trying to fight to keep them that way. I
Yeah.
don't speak for
No,
anybody
I
else here.
understand.
You speak for me, and yet, you know,
Hey Darby, how did you come up with 12 inclusionary units here?
What do you mean?
Well, I see in the first page of the staff report, we talk about when the project's built out, 15% of the 160 single-family lots, 38 low mod income housing units, 55 townhouses, and so forth. And then in the next paragraph, you know, we talk about 12 inclusionary units.
So what they had done is, of the 38 inclusionary units, the 38 low and moderate income units. 24, or 26 were for sale units, the circular de casitas units. And then we have what we call the Pasadena 12, which are the rental units. And it's just the difference between
Oh, I see.
the requirement and the for sale units.
It was just an agreement, so
Yeah.
they were just being nice.
Yeah.
It's pretty good, pretty good.
Should
Well,
they make sure there's no
originally-
concessions for
They
that?
agreed to it, but
Well,
They got
originally-
something, they
That's
got
nice.
something for that.
What
They
they
got
had
something for that.
originally hoped to do
No.
was have
That's
these units
not true.
occupied by
How the
employees.
county worked at that time, the attorney would recommend that staff ask the developer what they want to do. This avoids all laws and implications downstream. And so if they come up with a plan and we agree with that plan, we can put it into the ordinance. And so that's typically how these projects get negotiated is, we ask the developer, what are you willing to do? And this is partially what they were willing to do. Las Palmas is the same way. Several of the projects are that way. Palmer's making it more difficult for us to do that, and hence another reason to update the inclusionary ordinance. And I want to
adding on to
eliminate
that-
ambiguity. I want to get more down to, here's the system, here's the process, everybody understands it. We train planning staff, we train counter staff, this is it, and it's understood.
So adding on to what you just said, they proposed it, we accepted it. Now we're saying, all right, the low income that you propose, we're gonna allow you now to change them out to sell them, but they're still low income. That's what you could propose. As opposed to.
That was the deal.
As opposed to upping them to moderate.
Correct. So the developers originally requested when we had the meeting, moderate. They disappeared. We told them they would have to submit an amended plan to the original plan. It would have to go through HAC, it would have to go through the Planning Commission, and it would have to go to the Board of Supervisors. And so they have to amend their original plan in order to make this change to the plan. So they can submit whatever recommendation they want, we can submit whatever recommendation we want. This is something I really want to discuss with the committee and not make a quick decision on.
Thank you. Darby, you mentioned that 26 of the inclusionary units are for sale. What's the status of those 26?
Occupied?
They've been occupied for years, yeah.
Oh, they have?
Right off the
No,
bat.
I think that's not quite true.
No,
That's not the
Did
questions.
you say for foreclosures?
No, we bought it and we put it back
So,
out.
yeah, so 26
all
are
the
still for
houses are
sale.
in good standing. One was for sale a little while ago and it sold and they qualified. We have an account so we can purchase one if it does go into foreclosure to prevent it going into foreclosure. Last time we did that was about $30,000 in rehab, but it was still able to sell it at the inclusionary price. It's a nice product.
It's working pretty well then.
It's working pretty well. We need rental product. We need something that's, we need more product.
yeah, and that's so just beautiful to see, maintaining 12 rental units as inclusionary rental units in perpetuity. I love that term, in perpetuity, and we know, you know, what we've dealt with in the hundreds of late in that regard, and it just hurts so bad to think of losing that. I know it's only 12, but it's 12.
Well, we also have a goal of home ownership. So it's easy for me to get conflicted in our own policies since we have two goals. If I could maintain all rental, I think I'd probably lean towards maintaining all rental.
That's now and in the
It's more
future, really. It's the way it's going with everything now, just the way society is, the way people working in their 20s and 30s live their lives and plan their lives. It's just different now. And I'm just
Don't know
letting-
that I'm in agreement with the future. Some things of the past I like.
Right, I don't, yeah. And I found is that when I lost my house, I'm just now learning what it's like to be a renter, you know, for the first time. And I'm really realizing how burdened I was with home ownership and really falling behind. Just making that house payment became everything. And the value of the asset wasn't being maintained by me. And other people in my circle that I've talked to about that. So rental would have been a better option for me, you know, long ago.
The real issue with these, though, is that if they go through with what they've requested and it's approved the way they requested, you can call it workforce two housing, but there's not many people that are making $110,000 or $125,000 that would qualify. I mean, they're obviously out there, and the peninsula obviously has lots of them, and Salinas ag business has lots of them. But my goodness, move that from $58,000 or $60,000 to twice as much, you know, we've got to do our best to understand it and make a recommendation. And it certainly would be to resell it as, in my opinion, to resell it as a workforce one or a workforce two. And I understand that legally we aren't in the best stand in our negotiations, and that's unfortunate.
Fortunately, they haven't come up with it yet.
Okay, yeah, we'll have to wait and see what they have to say. Very good.
Any more discussion on that?
We'll be back on November 8th.
Yeah.
I think we might have a revised staff report. We'll see what they are willing to submit to us.
Okay. Committee member reports? Do we have any committees right now, do we?
No.
Updates from staff?
We did pass our annual review from HUD and get approved on our $122 million for our urban county,
1.2,
what did I say?
122.
Yeah.
There's a small difference.
Just a little bit different there.
$1,222,000 and something dollars, $25. It's grown from 800,000 because we've had cities join in. I think Darby's done a good job. We have a good relationship with HUD on this, so it's going well. I think, we're not building units, and I think the Board of Supervisors this year might look at some of these funds and say, can this go to building units? Can it go into homeless shelters? Can it go into other uses instead of permanent housing, which is our focus? There are restrictions on the dollars. We can do infrastructure, but we have, 400,000 or less to dole out in a county our size. And the cities get 200,000 or less. So once you divide the money up with all our partners in it, it doesn't go very far. I think it points to kind of what Karen was saying earlier, is let's spread that out, see what it can do and what it doesn't do. And then maybe we'll want to bring it back to the Board of Supervisors to show what it doesn't do and what our intent is to do. Here's what we want to do, here's what we're charged to do, and what we're unable to do.
Anything else?
I just want to give you guys an update on our rental monitoring. We got around 80% response this year. On that owner occupancy monitoring, I think we got 60-something%. So we are, we lost staff, so now it's myself and Anita working on the monitoring, and we are making it a goal to, get our response rate to go up every year. But we're not doing that bad, so, but that's our goal, to make it better and, higher response rate for next year. I also finished the successor agency monitoring projects, and I'm going to be helping Darby in the next couple of months to do the CDBG annual monitoring that has to be done with all the subrecipients. So just to let you guys know where we are with that. And what else? I'm going to be passing around the contact list. So there's a few blanks for some of you, so you guys can just fill in your contact numbers. So we can have
So we can track you down.
a list, and then after we have it all complete, Anita will email it out to all of you guys.
Rose, what about that, how do you track the gentleman that is supposed to move back into his unit in December? I'm waiting for that to
Mr.
happen, so.
Tykers, I have a reminder on my Outlook.
Okay, good. Well, I'll remind you as well, I'm gonna track that guy.
Is that the November 1st?
He's got
gotta
until
be
the end
there.
of November.
Can we volunteer to drive by his house?
No, but we can't follow up on it.
Yeah.
We celebrate with a welcoming basket.
Okay, any other staff updates?
I have a question for staff about those meetings.
So other reports,
The community meetings, like when, I know it's gonna be a long time from now, but when, not now, but with whom would we have a discussion if we're willing to be helpful to staff's efforts in having those community meetings besides just
I
showing up?
believe we
Is
would
this after we get
schedule
the
them
report?
as part of the LULAC meeting. And so then you would go to the LULAC meeting and they would make the consultant would make a presentation and we would assist the consultant.
Okay.
And what will happen is, once we have a consultant on board and we have a scope of work hammered out, and we know when the meetings have to occur,
Yeah.
we will work with planning department staff to get on the LUAC agendas. And once those dates are set, we will be able to share them with you so you can
Do outreach or?
do
try
outreach,
to get
whatever you
people-
want to
okay.
drive up attendance.
And you'll be part of our distribution list, so any updates, any upcoming meetings, you guys will be notified.
I want to support your investment in that. Good.
I have a comment on the consultant selection. I don't see anything here about selection criteria, but you might consider including something about some background on or understanding of legal challenges and so forth to inclusionary. I think we need more than just a housing consultant
It's a
here, but
two-step process there, Mark. So we hire a consultant to do the work. We already have a consultant on board, Goldfarb Lippman, that does our inclusionary work. And so it would go to them for legal review. So after the consultant's done and we're done with it, at that point, we send it to Goldfarb Lippman
oh, Goldfarb Lippman.
and have Ts and Is crossed for the
Okay.
legal review and to withhold legal challenges.
Okay,
So that's separate from what we're doing here,
okay.
but it gets done.
Hey, I just noticed my term expired.
We're so grateful that you're
So it
continued
waits.
on another
You know, yours expired too?
term as
They're
chair.
appointed.
Yeah, check that as well, because I think some of you may have gotten reappointed.
The
I gotta do it.
form's
Yeah.
incorrect. You're serving another 6 years. bud.
I'm-
I think.
I'm done.
It's an indeterminate sentence.
You're not done.
Are you, if you are expired, are you
Still
interested in
breathing?
renewing? You just have to go through the clerk of the board so that they can
Well,
reappoint you.
the supervisor's office.
Yeah, you got that.
Supervisor, I think Philip's
They
already.
might have some interest in that.
Philip's already reappointed.
So many committees to keep up with.
I guess you might want to elect a new chair since I'm not even officially here.
We'll let you close the meeting then.
Okay.
Should be a quorum meeting no matter what.
All right.
West has the question.
Yeah, so number 7 is actually committee member reports, not subcommittees. And I guess I have a few that are inclusionary housing ordinance. I mean, it's all in the word, right? The affordable housing was Lapis Road, and just recently there was ordinances passed to have them go first 24 hours gone.
No, you're
just
confusing
by-
us.
And then it turned into 10 to 6, right? You've gone during the day. And it's really hard. I mean, the RVs are actually an endangered species.
So you're
And-
confusing us on what we do. We
Okay.
do permanent housing, so their foundations are bolted, single family and rental product. We don't get involved in the homeless, the transient, the motor homes, any of that. That's not this committee.
Okay, well,
You
but
can
the-
comment about that, very free to comment.
Sure, that's all I got then. It's just the attitude of the words and the purviews of the place, affordable, inclusionary. We just need to be broadening our scope as to what
You can't, you
is.
have to follow, or we are not allowed to, we have to follow the law. And so we have federal law and state law because of the funds that we receive, and that's why we have to do the monitoring. So we have what you might consider a narrow scope.
Right.
I think of it as a broad scope in housing. But those issues, there's other groups, committees, departments, and resources that do that. That is not the Housing Advisory Committee, and it's certainly not the Housing Department.
In fact,
We do housing.
there's an opening right now on the housing, section 8 group. Who's that?
The housing,
Authority?
Housing Authority,
That's a different
for District 5, that is open, has been open several. They handle a lot of that information. And in Section 8, they're doing all of that activity. So if there's someone you might know in District 5 that would be interested in that they can be very, and there's only one commissioner for each district. And they make decisions on salaries. I mean, they do what board levels do, you know, school boards and et cetera. So that may be an interest if an opening comes up. And generally, the people on those, the person that's leaving that particular one is 15 years. And he was on it. So they do a lot of good things, and it's a very important position. So they do the kinds of things you're talking about, though.
We'll schedule an orientation for you guys that are new, so we can explain our laws and regulations and what we do.
Okay, well, but you also mentioned like leaving home and the warming shelter as topics of venue of your purview.
Well, that's what, no, not me.
Okay, so it's
That would
just-
be Elliot Robinson, so he does the short term and the care and the social services. We're not the
Right.
social services department.
All right, so this
And
is-
Elliot does that. Natalia mentioned that she wanted to talk about that.
Okay.
Yes,
That was-
I will serve on one of those committees with Elliot, and I'm more than willing to talk about that and have a discussion about that. But we don't work on, our funds aren't allowed to be used for those uses.
and we're not the policy experts in those areas.
Not at all, yeah.
The county has other folks that are those policy experts.
So our goal is to build permanent housing, very low, moderate, workforce 1, workforce 2. We don't do farm worker housing, but we weigh in on farm worker housing, particularly when the planning staff ask us to do a letter of support or not support and send that on to the planning commission. But it supersedes our regulations and our purview. Are we interested in it? We're very interested in it.
Having it end up not being under this umbrella.
It
State law.
supersedes very low, mod, state law, what we receive.
It's like a new
our funds for.
classification.
So,
No,
so
it's always been
employee,
separate.
employee housing is a separate animal under state law, and it's either handled at the state level by the Department of Housing and Community Development, or the county's environmental health bureau.
Right.
And that's the way that the law transfers the power locally. So we can weigh in on it, but ultimately it is the Environmental Health Law Bureau's responsibility to make sure that the housing is built and maintained as permitted employee housing. And there are special regulations around the requirements for those types of units. So we don't even go near them.
So we're really a redevelopment committee, and what has come out of the redevelopment is this is the housing component and how to build housing. So with the redevelopment dollars, there was a law that said 20% has to be set aside for affordable housing. You guys are the 20% set aside committee. So we've morphed a little bit because redevelopment's gone away as tax increment, but we have a redevelopment district. So East Garrison's a redevelopment district, and that continues on until the year 2023. Miranda,
Those all expired.
Rhonda,
I think they expired
the
last year.
budget's still there though.
There's still funds, but I believe the project area expired.
Project area expired. So where we have debt service or funds, we can make loans on projects and move it from one redevelopment area to another redevelopment area to make loans. But we're started off very specific.
And now that Dave mentioned East Garrison, we are going to, well, I am going to start income and asset qualifying. We have 84 townhomes that are going to be sold to moderate income households in that development. So if you guys haven't seen that development, you guys might want to check it out.
Where is
It's,
it?
a Restoration Road, East Garrison.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's very excited. Our wait list has been growing by the day for those 84 townhomes. So, so yeah, it's very nice.
It's between, off reservation between Davis and Blanco Road. Oh, yeah, you know.
Lots of flags there, you can't miss it.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
At the next meeting, we're going to have a new member, and she's here today, Natalia Molina. So,
Welcome.
mhm.
Which district is that? Ah, okay.
So we should probably,
Supervisors in 4 and 5 are getting along pretty well too.
Which one's
we should
for?
probably schedule an orientation before November 8th,
Okay.
so we can provide you with the laws, regulations,
I
and
never,
where to go.
can I do that? I never had an
Where is
orientation. I don't know that.
You can do that, but there's an extra charge for you, Karen.
I'll pay.
You got a binder.
I'll pay.
Comes with duct
Are
tape.
you worth it?
Southwest Salinas, Marina, Seaside.
But then-
Wes, this is a very
As far as
local
Seaside.
committee.
Cool.
As far as county committees go, their voice is loud and clear, and they have an opinion on every project. It's very
So I did
vocal.
print the bylaws and the conflict of interest rule for the new members. I don't know if the seasoned members ever received that. I can provide you guys that in the next meeting.
Thank you.
I also started this binder where I'm gonna put all of our important documents in here. I'm gonna have the bylaws, the conflict of interest rules, the roster of the members, member contact list, the Form 700, I'm gonna try to keep it updated. The housing element and the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance and the manual.
That's more than what I
So
want.
I'll be bringing this to every meeting, and if anybody, I don't know if you guys got one of those ever
Well,
in
not
the
with,
past?
not with as many subject oriented, but yes.
Okay, we can create one for you guys, so everybody can have it for reference for reading. But yeah, so that way everybody can have all the information, and any updates we'll be providing regularly, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Anything else? A motion to adjourn the meeting.
I saw it.
Second,
I will second it.
all in favor?
Aye.
Second.